The plane was packed, buzzing with the usual pre-flight tension. Passengers stowed away luggage, families whispered to each other, and the hum of the engines added a low buzz to the atmosphere. But for 12-year-old Malik, this flight was different. Today, he was sitting in one of the most coveted seats in first class, a seat that he had earned in a way most passengers couldn't even imagine. It was supposed to be a celebration, a long-awaited trip to visit his grandparents, but that peaceful moment would soon be shattered. Malik wasn't just another kid flying to see his family. He was a young boy from a humble background, but his life was anything but ordinary. His father was the CEO of a large, influential tech company, a fact that many didn't know, and one that Malik preferred to keep low-key. He wasn't interested in the luxury or the perks that came with his father's success. But today, he found himself on a plane ride where that very fact would cause his life to change in a way he never expected. As the flight attendants made their rounds, everything seemed routine. But then, a sharp voice interrupted the calm. The flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with a tight smile, approached Malik's seat, asking him to stand. She wasn't being rude, but there was something off about her tone. "I'm sorry, young man," she said, her voice carrying a hint of discomfort, "but we need to ask you to give up your seat. A passenger who is more important is going to need it." Malik blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, but I have a ticket for this seat," he responded politely, not fully understanding what was happening. The attendant's smile faltered, and for a moment, Malik thought she might back down. Instead, she explained, "We have a VIP passenger who requires this seat. You're going to have to move." The term VIP made Malik uneasy. Who was more important than him on this flight? And why was it him that had to move? He wasn't prepared for what came next. The moment the words left her mouth, Malik felt the heavy eyes of the other passengers fall on him. A ripple of whispers began, some muttering in confusion, others in judgment. A few even cast him sympathetic glances. It was as if the whole situation had an undercurrent of expectation. Expectation that Malik, as a young black boy, should just give way to a more deserving person. The tension in the air thickened as the flight attendant waited for him to comply. But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had done nothing wrong. He had every right to sit in that seat, and yet, in the eyes of the crew, his presence seemed to be an inconvenience. His thoughts raced as he debated whether to speak up or just avoid the confrontation altogether. Just as Malik was about to gather his things and head back to a less comfortable seat, the door of the cabin opened. Entering with the grace of someone who felt entirely entitled to their surroundings was a white, well-dressed man in his late 30s, the type you'd expect to see in the most prestigious business circles. His tailored suit, pristine shoes, and confident walk immediately drew attention from everyone on board. The moment he stepped in, the flight attendant looked at him with admiration and a certain reverence. She even rushed forward to greet him. That's when Malik realized, this VIP passenger was the one they'd been talking about. The unspoken message was clear. It didn't matter that Malik had a ticket for that seat, that he was already settled in, or that he wasn't causing any trouble. The VIP passenger, a white man with wealth and status, was clearly more important. Malik's heart raced as the attendant made a sweeping gesture toward the seat Malik was occupying. "Sir, this is your seat. Please, right here," she said, her voice now oozing with respect as she directed him toward Malik's space. The man looked at Malik with a dismissive glance. Without a word, he set his eyes on the seat and began moving toward it. Malik's gut told him to stand his ground, but his 12-year-old self felt the pressure of the moment weighing on him. Should he argue, or should he let it go? He had never been in this kind of situation before. In that tense moment, Malik did something that surprised everyone around him, including the flight crew. He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed a number only a few people knew, a number that carried immense weight. He didn't want to do it, didn't want to cause a scene, but something inside of him told him that he had no choice. On the other end of the line, his father answered with a calm voice, unaware of the storm brewing on the other side of the call. "Dad," Malik said, his voice shaking ever so slightly, "I need your help. I'm on a flight, and there's a problem. They're asking me to give up my seat for some guy, and they're not being nice about it. It's not fair." A long pause followed, before Malik's father spoke again. "Stay where you are, Malik. I'm handling it." The words were simple, but they were enough. Malik didn't know what his father was going to do or how he was going to do it, but he trusted him. In that moment, the flight felt like an entirely different world. It wasn't just a routine trip anymore. It was a battle of principles, of fairness, and of standing up for what was right. The flight attendant continued to stand there, watching Malik with impatience, but then, something incredible happened. Malik's father, a powerful and influential CEO, did something no one could have expected. He made a call, one that would change everything for everyone on board that plane. What he did next would have consequences no one could have predicted. The crew, the passengers, and even the VIP passenger would soon find themselves in a situation that no one could escape. But what happened next? How did Malik's father manage to flip the entire situation on its head? And what became of the flight crew who thought they could get away with this injustice? All of these questions were about to be answered, but not yet. Stay tuned to see how this shocking turn of events unfolded. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for his father's call to take effect. The noise of the plane seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the soft hum of his anxious thoughts. The VIP passenger, still oblivious to the brewing storm, settled into the seat with an air of superiority. The flight attendant, now standing at a distance, shot occasional glances toward Malik, clearly unsure of what to do next. But Malik wasn't about to move. Not without a fight. His father's calm words echoed in his mind, "Stay where you are, Malik. I'm handling it." But how? What could someone as powerful as his father do on a plane hundreds of miles up in the air? Malik didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing: his dad wasn't a man to be taken lightly. The quiet confidence he carried, the sense of authority that Malik had always felt at home, was now taking root in him. His dad had built an empire from the ground up, navigating through countless challenges. If anyone could fix this, it was him. The minutes felt like hours. Malik couldn't help but notice the way the other passengers were looking at him. A few exchanged glances, others whispered among themselves, but most didn't say a word. Malik had never felt more isolated. He was only 12, a kid whose life was supposed to be simple. But this wasn't simple. This was something much bigger than a seat on a plane. This was about respect. It was about not allowing others to define him by his skin color or his background. He had a right to be here, and no one, especially not a flight attendant or some entitled passenger, was going to take that away from him. The man in the seat next to him, a tall, quiet figure who had been reading a book, shifted his gaze toward the situation. His brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. Malik couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. Did he understand? Did anyone? As the plane began its slow ascent, the vibrations underfoot reminded Malik that the journey was still ongoing. The world outside the window seemed so far away, and for a moment, he longed to be back on solid ground, away from the tension and confusion. But he couldn't back down now. Not when his father had his back. Finally, Malik felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He glanced down, relieved to see a message from his father. It was short, but it was enough. "They're on it. Stay calm. We'll resolve this." Malik's shoulders relaxed slightly, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. What exactly was his father doing? How was he going to make a difference from so far away? Malik didn't know, but he had learned to trust in his father's decisiveness. The man didn't back down from anyone, and neither would Malik. The tension in the cabin was palpable, thickening with each passing moment. The flight attendant, still watching him closely, seemed to be waiting for Malik to either concede or raise further resistance. She didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, and Malik wasn't sure whether that would make things better or worse. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but there was no turning back. Just then, the captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet. Please sit back and relax as we begin our in-flight service." Malik exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But the moment of relief was brief. He could still feel the eyes of the passengers, the invisible weight of their expectations. What would they do if he didn't give up the seat? Would they side with the flight crew? Would they see him as a troublemaker? He didn't know. And then, in an instant, it happened. The flight attendant turned sharply and walked toward the front of the cabin. But just as she reached the partition, the door to the cockpit opened, and out stepped a man in a sharp suit. He didn't look like a flight crew member. He looked too important, too polished. His presence was commanding, and the way he moved through the cabin made it clear that he was no stranger to authority. Malik's heart skipped a beat. Could this be? Was this the person his father had called? The man approached Malik, his eyes scanning the row of seats before locking onto the young boy. "Excuse me, son," he said, his voice smooth but firm, "I need you to come with me. Now." Malik hesitated. The man's tone was unmistakably authoritative, yet his eyes were soft. There was something reassuring about him, but at the same time, an air of danger. Malik glanced toward the flight attendant, who was still standing at the front, watching the scene unfold. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. She knew something was happening, but she wasn't sure what. The other passengers were starting to take notice, their gazes shifting back and forth between Malik and the man. The air felt charged, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. "Who are you?" Malik asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The man didn't flinch. "I'm with the airline," he said calmly. "I've been sent to resolve this situation." Malik could sense the unease in the room growing. The flight attendant had been expecting something different. But Malik wasn't going anywhere until he understood who this man was and what he wanted. "I'm not moving," Malik said, standing firm. "You don't have the right to make me leave this seat." The man smiled slightly, though it was a smile of understanding, not mockery. "I understand, son. But your situation is a bit more complicated than you think. You'll want to come with me." Before Malik could respond, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek phone. Without saying a word, he dialed a number. Malik watched as he held the phone to his ear, the conversation happening in low, measured tones. He couldn't hear the words, but there was no mistaking the intensity of the call. Whatever was happening, it was big. It was important. The flight attendant, who had been silent all this time, stepped closer, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. The man glanced up at her and nodded once. "You're dismissed," he said, his voice carrying a weight of finality that made her flinch. Malik felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the flight crew was no longer in control. The power dynamics had shifted. Whatever was coming next would change everything. But what was about to happen? Why had this man come to speak with him? And how far would this go? The answers seemed just out of reach. And as the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air only deepened, leaving Malik on edge, knowing that the storm was far from over. The man in the suit didn't move from his spot. His presence was magnetic, almost as if the entire cabin had collectively shifted in his direction. The tension was thick enough to be cut with a knife. Malik stood his ground, still clutching his seatbelt, unwilling to budge. The flight attendant, her face a mask of confusion and worry, hesitated, but said nothing. The murmurs from the other passengers began to grow, their whispers forming a low hum that filled the cabin. The man, whose face remained impassive, finally lowered the phone from his ear. "Son," he said again, his voice calm but firm, "this isn't about you or your seat. This is about something much bigger than a flight." Malik's stomach churned. Something bigger. What did that even mean? The words barely made sense, but they hung in the air, a sign of something hidden. Malik had already been grappling with the reality that his seat was being taken away because of a simple social construct. But now, the stakes seemed to have shifted into unfamiliar territory. What was really going on here? The man continued, his gaze steady. "The situation on this flight is more complicated than you realize. And if you stay in that seat, you may cause a chain reaction you can't undo. It's not just about you and this VIP passenger. It's about a much bigger story, one that you have a part in, whether you know it or not." Malik's mind spun, unable to process the sudden shift in tone. His eyes flicked over to the other passengers, who were now watching him with varying degrees of interest and judgment. Some appeared sympathetic, others, most of them, in fact, looked more intrigued than concerned. Had they caught on to something Malik hadn't yet? Was there more to this than just a misplaced seat? "I don't understand," Malik whispered, the weight of the man's words pressing on him. "What do you mean, a bigger story?" The man exhaled, the briefest hint of hesitation creeping into his features. "There's more happening here than you know. Your father's influence, the way he's handled this situation, it's all part of a much larger network. But people like this VIP, they want to control the narrative. They don't want you to see what's really happening." The words felt like they were ricocheting in Malik's mind. "Who is this man? What do you mean, people like him?" Malik's voice trembled slightly, a mix of curiosity and growing fear. The room felt smaller, suffocating. The man's lips tightened, and he glanced briefly toward the cockpit before his eyes returned to Malik. "This passenger isn't just some wealthy traveler. He's a corporate figure, a key player in an international business deal. Your father's company, the one he built, is involved in something that's about to come to light. And this flight? It's part of a much bigger chess game." Malik felt his chest tighten. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. His father wasn't just a CEO. He was caught up in something dangerous, something that Malik had no idea about. The disconnect between his father's world and Malik's own life had never seemed so vast. And now, with these cryptic words from a complete stranger, everything he thought he knew was beginning to unravel. But before he could ask more, the man held up his hand. "I can't explain everything here. But your father's role in this? It's critical. You're a part of it whether you realize it or not. The words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. A part of it? What was he talking about? How was Malik involved? He was just a kid. The only thing he knew was that his dad was busy, successful, and distant at times, but he had never felt any of the weight of the business world, never been a pawn in some corporate battle. The man leaned in closer, lowering his voice. This plane ride, the way it's unfolding, it's not a coincidence. It's a calculated move. Your seat being taken, your involvement in this, it's all connected. Your father may have built his empire from the ground up, but this is bigger than him. And you've been caught in the middle of it. Malik wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, he stood frozen, unable to move or think clearly. The situation had spiraled out of his control. The whole reason he had wanted this trip in the first place, the simple joy of visiting his grandparents, was being overshadowed by something he didn't understand. What had his father gotten himself into? What was this game the man was talking about? And why did Malik's seat, just a small detail, seem to matter so much? Across the aisle, the VIP passenger had taken notice of the conversation. He had been watching silently, his eyes narrowing as he observed the exchange. Malik could feel the weight of his gaze, and it made him uncomfortable, like a predator watching its prey. The man's presence in the seat wasn't just about power, it was about control. And it seemed like he wanted more than just Malik's seat. He wanted Malik to bow to the weight of his influence. The flight attendant, still standing by the front, made a sudden movement toward the cockpit. Her face was a mixture of fear and anxiety, and Malik could see she was trying to make sense of what was unfolding. The sudden shift in the dynamics of the plane was starting to affect everyone. She, too, was caught in the crossfire of something far more dangerous than any in-flight turbulence. The minutes passed in silence, each one stretching longer than the last. The crew and passengers seemed to sense the shift, as if the tension in the air was pressing against them all. The uncertainty was suffocating. Was Malik supposed to back down? Was he supposed to just hand over his seat and pretend that nothing was wrong? His father had never been the type to run from anything. Should Malik do the same? Just then, a voice crackled through the intercom again. This time, it wasn't the captain. The voice was deep, authoritative, and unmistakably familiar. Malik recognized it immediately. His father's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Edward Harris, CEO of Skytech Industries," the voice announced, sending a ripple of shock through the cabin. "I've been made aware of some concerns regarding the seating arrangement on this flight. Please know that I am personally overseeing the resolution of this issue." The man in the suit, who had been standing in front of Malik, stiffened at the sound of the announcement. Malik's eyes widened as the realization hit him. His father had just broadcasted his involvement to the entire plane. The power shift was happening in real time, and Malik could feel the weight of it. The man turned sharply and walked toward the front of the plane, his footsteps hurried. Whatever was about to happen next, it was clear that the balance of power had shifted, and Malik was at the center of it all. As the plane continued its steady course through the sky, one thing became clear: Malik's world had just collided with a truth he wasn't prepared for. And now, there was no turning back. The cabin was now eerily quiet, a heavy silence hanging over everyone. The voice of Malik's father still lingered in the air, reverberating in the minds of the passengers. "I am personally overseeing the resolution of this issue." It was a promise of power, but also of impending consequences. Malik felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. His father's name was a lifeline, but it also painted a target on his back. Whatever was happening, whatever his father was involved in, Malik was now tangled up in the middle of it. The man in the suit had hurried toward the front of the cabin the moment the announcement ended, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stopped near the first-class seats, his body tense as he glanced back toward Malik. The man's posture was stiff, as though awaiting an order, or perhaps an ultimatum. But no one moved. The passengers around Malik were watching, eyes wide, their gazes flicking between him and the suited man, waiting for something to happen. And Malik? He stood frozen, too many questions swirling in his head. What had his father meant by taking charge of the situation? Why had the corporate player on this flight, the one who seemed to be pulling the strings, been so eager to try and intimidate him? And why was this all happening now, in the air, thousands of feet above the ground? Malik glanced again at the man in the suit. Something about his rigid posture felt off, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't quite fit, and that made Malik's heart race even faster. Out of nowhere, the intercom buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just Malik's father's voice, it was the captain. But the words that came out of the speaker made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "We've been rerouted," the captain's voice announced, a hint of tension unmistakable in his tone. "Please remain seated and follow all crew instructions. We will be making an unscheduled landing shortly." The cabin erupted into nervous murmurs, the quiet buzz of confusion filling the air. A reroute? What did that mean? Was this part of the plan, or had something gone terribly wrong? Malik's eyes darted to the cockpit, his mind racing. This wasn't a normal situation. A flight didn't get rerouted without a serious reason, and the timing was too coincidental. This was all happening for a reason, a purpose he wasn't yet privy to. The suited man, his face impassive, walked toward the back of the plane again. His steps were deliberate, but there was a nervous energy to his movements now. He stopped briefly in front of the flight attendant, who had retreated to the back after Malik's father's announcement. Her face was pale, eyes wide with confusion, but the man didn't look at her. Instead, he turned toward the rest of the passengers, his gaze sweeping over them as though searching for something. Malik's pulse quickened. This was no longer about a seat. This was no longer about him. Something was happening beyond his control. The man in the suit was now eyeing the other passengers with an intensity that made their discomfort palpable. They were all part of this twisted puzzle, each of them holding a piece of the truth, but none of them had the full picture. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the plane lurched. The sudden dip made everyone gasp, their bodies jolting forward in their seats. The oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments, their bright yellow bags fluttering in the air as they fell, swinging with the plane's movements. Panic spread like wildfire through the cabin as the pressure of the sudden descent became real. Malik gripped his seat, his fingers trembling as the world seemed to tilt beneath him. "Stay calm," the captain's voice came again, but this time it was strained. "There's no need to panic. We are preparing for an emergency landing." An emergency landing. Malik's heart pounded so hard in his chest it felt like it might burst. What the hell was going on? Why was this happening? He could barely think straight, the chaos in the cabin taking over, the unsettling feeling of the plane nosediving too quickly. He glanced at the suited man. The man didn't flinch. He was still standing, still watching, but his eyes were now darting around the cabin with a sharp, calculating gaze. The flight attendants scrambled down the aisle, helping passengers fasten their seatbelts and putting on their own masks. But Malik noticed something. Some of the attendants looked less hurried, almost mechanical, as if they were doing this out of habit rather than urgency. What did they know that they weren't telling the passengers? The cabin was filling with a low murmur, as the passengers tried to make sense of the situation. Their faces were pale, some were praying, others just staring straight ahead, hands gripping armrests, waiting for what would happen next. Malik's thoughts swirled. Was this part of his father's plan? Had his dad somehow orchestrated this entire event? But why? Why would he put Malik in the middle of it? He wanted to trust his father, but everything happening right now felt like it was spiraling out of control. If this was a game, if this was some kind of power struggle, then what was Malik supposed to do? What could he do? The suited man turned sharply and headed back toward the cockpit. A moment later, the air pressure dropped again, sending another wave of unease through the cabin. Malik's heart skipped a beat as the plane seemed to lurch again, only this time it felt different, more intentional. Like the descent wasn't just about reaching the ground, but about something else. Something far more urgent. He looked around the cabin. The tension had turned into outright fear. No one knew what was going to happen, and no one could make sense of the chaos unfolding. But Malik had the distinct feeling that everything happening right now, everything, the rerouting, the emergency landing, the strange behavior of the flight crew, the man in the suit, was all tied to one person. His father. And at that moment, Malik realized, this wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't just about some man trying to intimidate a kid. This was something much bigger. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. The man in the suit reappeared, but this time he was different. His posture had changed, and his expression was harder, colder. He was no longer just a corporate player, he was something else now, something dangerous. And as he locked eyes with Malik from across the aisle, Malik knew without a doubt, everything that had happened so far had been leading up to this moment. The final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. And whatever came next would change everything. The suited man stepped forward again, his movements slower, more deliberate this time. The tension in the cabin had reached a fever pitch, with every passenger holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Malik couldn't tear his eyes away from the man, whose presence had become more menacing with each passing second. He was no longer just a corporate figure or an ordinary passenger, he felt like a predator, circling its prey, and Malik was the centerpiece of his attention. But just as Malik prepared himself for whatever was about to happen next, a voice echoed through the plane, cutting through the stillness like a blade. It was not the captain this time. It was the flight attendant, speaking in hushed tones, barely audible over the sound of the plane's engines. "There's someone on board who shouldn't be," she said, her words laced with fear. The air seemed to grow heavier as the room went silent. The passengers' eyes darted nervously around the cabin, as if trying to decipher what the flight attendant had just hinted at. Malik's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean? Who could be on board that shouldn't be? Was it the man in the suit? Was this all part of the plan? But before he could ask, the suited man snapped his head toward the front of the cabin, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto something unseen. For a moment, Malik thought he saw a flicker of panic behind the man's cold exterior, a brief crack in his otherwise impenetrable mask. The man looked toward the cockpit once more, and then back at Malik, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, without warning, the emergency alarms blared, sending everyone into a frenzy. The sound was deafening, the flashing red lights flooding the cabin with an urgent, ominous glow. The plane lurched again, but this time, the descent felt sharper, more abrupt. Malik's breath caught in his throat. Was this it? Was this the moment everything would crash down? The fear in the air was palpable. People were shouting, grabbing for their seatbelts, praying under their breath. The flight attendants scrambled, trying to reassure everyone, but their faces betrayed the panic they were desperately trying to suppress. In the midst of the chaos, the suited man finally spoke, his voice eerily calm despite the pandemonium around him. "It's too late now," he muttered, almost to himself, but loud enough for Malik to hear. His words were clipped, heavy with finality. "Too late for what?" Malik demanded, his voice shaking with fear and frustration. He needed answers, he couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. The man turned to face him, his icy gaze locking onto Malik's. "You should have handed over your seat when you had the chance," he said, his tone colder than ever. "You're in this far deeper than you realize." Malik's mind was spinning. What was he talking about? What seat? He thought back to the moment when the man had first asked him to give up his place. How could something as simple as that have set all this in motion? But before Malik could ask another question, a new voice cut through the tension, this one deep and authoritative. "Attention all passengers, this is Captain Daniel speaking," came the voice through the intercom, but something in it made Malik's blood run cold. There was an urgency to the captain's tone that was unmistakable. "We are experiencing an unplanned descent. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. We'll be landing shortly at a private airstrip." A private airstrip? The word sent a chill down Malik's spine. That wasn't standard protocol. Why was the plane being diverted like this? What was really happening? As the plane shook violently, Malik's mind raced. Was this part of the plan too? Was this all a setup, orchestrated by someone behind the scenes? The suited man, still standing motionless near the front, seemed to know more than he was letting on. And that terrified Malik. He realized now that he was no longer just a victim of bad luck, he was part of something much bigger, a dangerous game of power, manipulation, and control. In the midst of the commotion, Malik caught a glimpse of something that sent his pulse racing, his father's personal assistant, Claire, walking swiftly down the aisle toward him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and her lips were pressed together in a tight line as though she had just been told something that shattered her world. "Claire!" Malik called out, but she didn't stop. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she moved directly toward the suited man, her expression unreadable. Malik's heart skipped a beat. What was Claire doing here? She wasn't supposed to be on this flight. What could she possibly have to do with all of this? As Claire reached the suited man, she stopped, her body stiffening for a moment before she leaned in and whispered something into his ear. The suited man's face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Whatever she said, it wasn't good. Then, to Malik's shock, Claire turned her gaze toward him. For a brief, fleeting moment, their eyes locked. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that screamed warning. Before Malik could react, Claire was gone, moving back toward the front of the plane, disappearing behind the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin. Malik's mind was in overdrive. What had she just said? Why had she looked at him like that? And what was this sudden, unexplained tension between her and the suited man? The plane's descent grew steeper, more unsettling with each passing second. The oxygen masks swung from their compartments, and the shrill sound of alarms seemed to pierce the air. Panic was spreading like wildfire, but something about the urgency in the captain's voice and the cryptic exchange between Claire and the suited man made Malik's blood run cold. This wasn't just a mechanical failure. This wasn't just an emergency landing. Something more was at play here, and Malik was right at the center of it. Just as the plane jolted violently, signaling that they were moments away from landing, the suited man stepped forward again, his eyes locking with Malik's once more. There was no escape now, no way to turn back. Everything was about to change. But before Malik could even process what was happening, the plane's wheels touched the ground with a harsh, jarring thud, and the world around him seemed to explode in chaos. They had landed, but what awaited them on the ground was far more terrifying than Malik could ever have imagined. The plane's wheels screeched against the runway as it came to an abrupt stop. The cabin, once filled with the roar of the engines and the constant buzz of anxious murmurs, now fell into an unsettling silence. For a few moments, everything was still. But that stillness was more unnerving than any noise. The plane had landed, but no one knew what came next. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, every muscle in his body on high alert. The suited man was already moving down the aisle, heading toward the front of the plane with an unsettling calm. His eyes never left Malik as he passed, and for a brief second, their gazes locked. Malik's stomach churned with unease. The flight attendants, who had been scrambling just moments ago, now moved with mechanical precision, ushering the passengers off the plane in a way that felt too organized, too rehearsed. There was no chaos. There was no panic anymore, just a cold, calculated efficiency. Malik's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. As he stood to follow the crowd, he noticed Claire again, standing near the exit, talking quietly to the suited man. Her face was pale, but her eyes seemed strangely resolute. She caught Malik's gaze, her expression flickering for a brief moment with something he couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? But then, it was gone. She quickly turned back toward the suited man, nodding slightly. Malik, she called out, her voice strangely hollow, you need to follow them. Now. Malik's throat tightened, and before he could ask another question, the suited man gave a sharp nod and stepped aside, allowing the passengers to leave. The eerie calm that had settled over the cabin now seeped into the air outside, where a line of black SUVs awaited, engines running, their dark windows obscuring the faces of whoever was inside. Malik was guided toward one of the vehicles, his movements stiff, his mind racing. This was all too surreal. Why had they landed here, in the middle of nowhere? Why was Claire so involved? And what had the suited man meant when he'd said, "It's too late now"? The moment Malik slid into the back of the SUV, the door slammed shut behind him. The interior of the vehicle was darker than he expected, the leather seats smooth and unyielding. As the SUV pulled away from the plane, Malik glanced out the window, but there was nothing outside but darkness, no signs of life, no lights. It was as though they were driving deeper into the unknown. The suited man sat across from Malik, his eyes never leaving him. "You don't understand, do you?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. Malik shook his head, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. "What is this? What's happening?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the seat toward Malik, the paper sharp and crisp against the leather. "Your father," the man began, his voice low, "has been running an operation that you know nothing about. And you, Malik, have been at the center of it the whole time." Malik's breath caught in his throat. The words echoed in his mind, crashing together in a jumble of confusion. "What do you mean?" "My father's, what do you mean, operation?" The man's lips curled into a small, almost mocking smile. "Your father has a very specific way of doing business. He's been testing people, manipulating situations for years. And you, Malik, are the next part of his plan." The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Malik's mind raced, struggling to make sense of the man's revelation. His father, a businessman, a man he had always respected, was involved in something far darker than Malik could have ever imagined. He wasn't just a powerful CEO, he was a puppet master, pulling strings in ways Malik could never have fathomed. But there was something deeper. Something more terrifying. "You were never supposed to be on that plane," the man continued, his eyes narrowing. "Your father's plans were set in motion long before you even knew about it. That seat, the VIP seat. It wasn't a mistake. You were meant to take it. And everything that happened after. It was part of the test." Malik's heart stopped. His mind couldn't keep up. "Test? What are you talking about? What test?" The suited man's eyes glinted with something dark, something dangerous. "You were being watched. Every move you made, every decision, was observed. Your father wanted to see how you would react in a crisis. He wanted to know if you were ready to take over. Ready to lead." Malik's chest tightened. "Lead what? What kind of test is this? Why me?" The man's gaze turned colder. "Because you're his son. And because you've always been a part of the plan. You just didn't know it." The words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. The realization started to settle in, slow and suffocating. His father had orchestrated all of this, the flight, the strange man in the suit, the emergency landing, everything. It had all been part of some grand design to test him, to see if he could rise to the occasion. But why? Why had his father kept this from him? Before Malik could process it any further, the SUV pulled to a stop. The doors opened, and the suited man stood, motioning for Malik to follow him. As Malik stepped out into the dark night, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. But just as they approached a large, imposing building, the suited man stopped. He turned to Malik, a glint of something cold and calculating in his eyes. "Your father isn't the only one with plans," he said softly. "There are others who have been watching you. And soon, Malik, you'll have to decide where your loyalty truly lies." And in that moment, as the doors of the building loomed in front of him, Malik realized that his life was no longer his own. The twists, the lies, the manipulation, it was all part of a much larger game. And as the suited man led him forward, Malik's heart pounded with the terrifying truth: the real test was only just beginning. The final twist, the one he never saw coming, was about to unfold. And Malik had no idea which side of the game he was really playing on. Malik stood frozen in the cold night air, the looming building before him a stark reminder of how far he had fallen into a web of secrets and lies. The suited man led the way, his footsteps echoing in the quiet as Malik's thoughts raced, trying to process everything he had just learned. His father, the man who had always been his role model, had orchestrated this entire ordeal. The test, the manipulation, it was all part of a plan he had never been privy to. A plan Malik now realized he could no longer escape from. As they entered the building, Malik was struck by how sterile and impersonal the place felt, like a high-tech fortress rather than an office or a home. The walls were sleek, the floors polished, and the air was thick with the scent of money and power. It was clear that this wasn't just a business operation, this was something far darker. The kind of world Malik had never even dreamed of being a part of. They walked down a long hallway, the suited man's footsteps never faltering, while Malik struggled to keep up. His mind was still spinning, questions swirling, but he was too afraid to ask them aloud. It felt as though the moment he spoke, the truth would shatter even more of what he thought he knew about his family, about his life. The suited man finally stopped in front of a massive set of glass doors. He turned to Malik, a cold smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Behind these doors, you'll find the truth," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Everything you've been questioning. Everything your father never told you. It's all here." Malik's heart raced, but he couldn't move. Part of him was terrified of what awaited him, yet another part was desperate for answers. What was his father involved in? What kind of plan was Malik supposed to lead? Taking a deep breath, Malik pushed the door open. Inside, the room was enormous. The walls were lined with screens, and in the center was a large table, surrounded by chairs. But it wasn't the high-tech surroundings that caught Malik's attention. It was the faces in the room. Sitting at the table were several people, some familiar, some not, but all of them wearing expressions that told Malik this was a world he was no longer a stranger to. And then, at the head of the table, sat his father. For a moment, Malik couldn't breathe. The man he had idolized, the man he had always seen as the pillar of stability, was sitting there like a king, no, a puppet master, pulling the strings of an entire operation. His father looked up, his eyes locking onto Malik's with a calm that was almost unsettling. "Malik," his father said, his voice smooth but firm. "I see you've met our new friend." He gestured toward the suited man, who stood silently at the back of the room. "He's been a part of this plan longer than you could ever imagine." Malik could feel his legs shake beneath him, but he forced himself to remain steady. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What have you been doing? What's the truth?" His father sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not as complicated as you're making it seem, Malik. I've been building something for years, an empire, a network. People don't become successful by playing fair. They don't get to the top by being honest and good. It's a cutthroat world, and you need to be ready for that." Malik's mind reeled. "You've been testing me this whole time. Manipulating everything." His father's gaze never wavered. "Yes, and it's been for your own good. You were always going to be a part of this. You're my son. But I had to know if you had what it took. If you could handle it. If you could make the hard decisions." The weight of his father's words hit Malik like a ton of bricks. All his life, he had thought he was being raised to take over the family business, but he never imagined it would be like this, an elaborate game of deception, with his every move carefully orchestrated. His father wasn't just preparing him for success, he was preparing him for something far darker, something that made Malik question everything about his upbringing. The suited man spoke up again, his voice low but authoritative. "Your father has set everything in motion, but it's your turn now, Malik. You're the next step in the plan. You're the one who decides what comes next." Malik's mind was a blur. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice trembling with frustration. "I didn't choose this. I don't want to be a part of this anymore." His father's eyes darkened. "You don't have a choice. This is your legacy. This is your destiny." The words hung heavy in the air, like chains wrapping around Malik's chest. The weight of the world seemed to press down on him, suffocating him. Everything he had known, everything he had believed about his family, about his father, everything was a lie. And yet, deep inside, a part of Malik knew that he couldn't walk away from this. He was in too deep. The test had been designed not just to challenge him but to mold him into something else, something he didn't recognize. "Then I'll make my own choices," Malik said, his voice steady now, a newfound resolve starting to build inside him. "If I'm going to be part of this, I'll do it on my terms. No more tests. No more manipulation. I decide what happens next. His father's expression softened, but only slightly. That's what I wanted to hear. And with that, the tension in the room seemed to dissolve, just a little. The suited man nodded, stepping forward to place a folder on the table. Then, it's time for you to make your first move, he said. It won't be easy. But we'll be watching. Malik stared down at the folder, his hand hovering above it. It was a decision that would shape the rest of his life. The weight of the moment pressed on him, but for the first time, he felt something different: control. Not the kind his father had imagined, but his own. He wasn't just a pawn in their game anymore. He was going to carve his own path. As he opened the folder, revealing the documents inside, Malik took a deep breath. The road ahead was uncertain, the stakes higher than ever, but one thing was clear: the game had just begun. And this time, he wasn't going to play by anyone's rules but his own. As Malik looked up, his father's eyes met his, and for the first time, Malik saw something he had never noticed before: fear. A fear that his son might be the one to break free from the web of manipulation that had been spun around them for so long. The real battle was just starting. Black boy, VIP seat, CEO dad, fired crew, airline story, family secrets, plot twist, shocking twist, suspense story, unexpected twist, powerful story, family drama, CEO manipulation, tension, thrilling narrative, viral story, test of loyalty, life-changing decision, dark secrets, moral dilemma, shocking ending.